Okay, we're on. Okay, nobody on at the moment, but good evening to everybody that will join us. Sorry we're a bit late. We just got sidetracked with a bit of football conversation, as is the norm. Thank you so much for joining us, Ryan. Ryan's joining us from the hugely successful PE Umbrella podcast, and we're just going to chat PE. I've got a loose kind of agenda for this evening, but I'm sure we'll go off on a number of tangents, and we'll just talk all things PE. So I guess to start with, Ryan, I know we've already discussed this sort of privately, but if you could tell us a bit about your journey and how the PE Umbrella podcast started and why.
Yeah, no problem. How far back do you want me to go journey-wise?
What year did you start teaching in primary schools? Maybe that's a good start.
Goodness, point. Right. Okay. So I think my PGC may have been 2011, 12. Mm-hmm. It's about 8 years ago. And did my PGC at University of Leeds, and then got a job off the back of that here in Harrogate, where I am now. Thrown in year 3-4 class in my first year. And then I subsequently did another 2 further years in year 5-6. And I've always had PE's always been my thing in terms of a love of mine. I had a coaching background before teaching, football coaching in the States, over here, and getting a few other badges for bits and pieces. And always loved it at school. And I was sort of enticed, probably when the sports premium was at its high, was kicking off really, by a local company to here asking me if I'd be interested in joining the team and doing some CPD in schools local to Harrogate. And it was like a carrot dangling as a way out. And at the time I was feeling quite bogged down with class teaching, very busy. Yeah. My life was all about my class and teaching. And at the time I had a son, my wife as well. And I was finding life quite tough balancing it. So I sort of took a punt thinking, you know what, if it doesn't work out, could maybe always go back into teaching. So I spent 3 years working at what was called Sporting Influence here in Harrogate. And it was after my first year with them, I had the sort of idea for the podcast, for the PE Umbrella.
Okay.
I listened to many other podcasts, mainly motivational business. So there's one called Entrepreneur on Fire, EO Fire. And it's a chap called John Lee Dumas in America. And he just interviewed many successful entrepreneurs. And he basically went into the nitty gritty about their journey. What was your lowest point? What was your highest point? Tell us about how you went from sleeping on your friend's sofa to what you're doing now. And I just found it really inspirational. And a lot of the messages coming through were, whatever you do in life, follow your passion, follow your dream, do what you love. And that was sort of compounded when I discovered a chap called Gary Vaynerchuk as well. Gary V, you may or may not know him. And again, he's all about that, do what you love. So I thought, you know what, for once in my life, I'm going to say I'll do something and I'll follow through. And I said to my wife, look, I'm going to do a PE podcast. And she probably thought I'm absolutely off my rocker. We were in Florida on holiday at the time. And I thought, no, I'm going to do it. And I was brainstorming ideas. I was Googling how to launch a podcast. What do I need? I need to buy a mic. I need to host it. I need to all these things. And then 2 months later, the PE Umbrella was born. That was kind of my wife's, one of her suggestions of a name. So we rolled with it. I liked the idea. It's the umbrella covering more than just what I see PE as the physical. There's many things come under that umbrella. That was the original reason for naming it that.
Yeah.
So October 2015, the PE Umbrella was born. Continued doing that alongside my PE primary teaching job. Having had an unfortunate injury to my back and needing an operation, I had to leave that job. Went back into classroom teaching in 2018, September. And after a month, realised it was a mistake. And so since jumped back out of that, and I'm now self-employed as Ryan Ellis as the PE Umbrella since that's grown, 4.5 years into the podcast. And it's really grown from being, it's an umbrella message. And this is what I say to everybody now when I go to do conferences and on the podcast, that I had an early guest called Bob Knight from America. And we were talking all things PE like we do. And he said to me, what does the PE Umbrella mean to you? And I was like, right, well, I explained what I've just done to you. And he said, right, it's funny, Ryan, because I see the PE Umbrella as a metaphor for something you'd carry through life with you. Just like a real umbrella would protect you from the rain or the elements outside, your PE umbrella is something you carry with you, which you can draw upon with all these skills to get you through life situations. And I remember sitting there with my notepad and pen and nodding, going, you've hit the nail on the head there, Bob. That's exactly what the PE Umbrella is. And since that interview, that's the ethos that I've taken with it, in that it's honing, it's developing life skills that these children, that adults will carry with them through lives, this metaphorical umbrella, that any social situation, physical situation, anything that's sort of playing on their emotions, they can draw from that toolkit, from that umbrella, to help them with whatever's in their way.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it really speaks to one of the projects that we've actually got going at the moment called Inspired Lives. We were piloting it at one of our schools this year, and talking about similar things that you were mentioning there. We've delivered resilience days, creativity days, days to boost confidence. We did a creative performing arts day. So yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from. It does give children those tools. And also I think one of the biggest things that we've found is those leadership skills that you generate in PE, develop in PE, not necessarily through being a sports leader in your school, but taking on different roles within a PE lesson. Yeah, I love that. Love the term. So in terms of the PE umbrella then, is that your kind of mission behind it, to help schools realize that PE can do all of those things?
Yes. I mean, the mission originally, and I guess it still is the main one for me, was to always, in my mind, the perfect listener, and this has probably changed now actually, but at the time, my perfect listener was a primary school teacher who has probably had little to no training in PE. My PGCE was ITT was barely any hours, but that didn't faze me. Coming from my coaching background, I found it okay. But then I put myself, I tried to be empathetic towards those on my course who seemed to be panicking. And why are they panicking? Why are they so upset? And actually, looking at it, they weren't given much. So my first thought was, if I could do a podcast that was interviewing other practitioners, PE teachers, and a bit like the Entrepreneur on Fire podcast I listen to, using that format, ask them for quick wins, top tips, favorite activities, class management, warm-ups, worst lessons, stories. And if I could share that to the audience, and if a teacher could listen and just get even one thing that they could then try and action in their class that week or that month, then that was my goal for that audience, for that focus. But the more I've done the podcast, and while I still think it would be beneficial for class teachers to listen to, we're getting more primary PE specialists with specialism with listening and being able to sort of magpie ideas, share ideas, and there's a lot of good quality stuff on there. And for me, hosting the podcast, it's probably been the best CPD I could have done, because I sit there asking questions, but I've got my notepad and pen. I curate it, I listen to it back, I take quotes and ideas, and it's been wonderful. And that's the aim. So now it's really supporting teachers in the delivery of their curriculum. And it might not be that they agree with what I say, even if their one takeaway is, I'm not going to do what Ryan said because it won't work for me. Then that's fair enough. That's the way they've interpreted it for their environment, their personal needs, their school. That's good for me. It's just to spark conversation about PE and what can be done, and all the benefits from it. So like you said, we've had episodes talking about sport education as a pedagogy for delivery, and that in itself, a primary class teacher who's just had a few hours on a PGC would never have delved that deep into PE about the different pedagogies. It's very basic. And that's something I think can be sorely missed, and it's not too difficult to understand. I think anyone could deliver that. So yeah, hopefully we can enlighten people through the podcast and entertain them at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. I think listening to you speak about the podcast and PE there, obviously very passionate about improving PE delivery in schools. And I've attended a number of PE conferences in the past, and they're brilliant. Like you go to some average ones, but you go to some amazing ones. And like you said, I suppose, and this isn't a criticism of PE leads and schools necessarily, but the ones that want to listen to that message are typically your PE leads. So like you said, they listen to your podcast, but it's the ones that they're happy to take that message back. But then it's, I guess, how do you go from there to almost embedding that philosophy, that ethos at the schools? I guess that's the biggest battle, right?
Yeah, it is. I find that the best way to do that has always been for me face-to-face when I was working delivering CPD. And that wasn't to say you could convert everybody. I don't think you can. And this is something I've been going on a lot about recently on the podcast, where I think there's some people out there, for whatever reason that may be, who are just not big fans of PE, physical activity. And that's okay. And that's their personal truth that I can't change. I can provide them evidence as for why I think it's good and why they should be doing it. But the more I push, the more they're going to be pushing back to try and defend their stance, I think, some of these people. So it's like me, I've said on the podcast, you could throw money at me to upskill me in teaching French, and I might get better at teaching French, but deep down, I still don't like teaching French. And, you know, it's not going to change my belief. So I think face-to-face, that's the easiest to do. If you can work over a 6, 7, 8, 9 week block with a teacher, and you can really support them, guide them with resources, with discussions before lessons, after lessons, with their children, and provide a meaningful benefit that helps them and reduces that workload. Because having been there in the classroom, the first thing I can do when I go into any school is empathize with what they're going through. It's easy.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's easy for the teacher to, you know, I can imagine them seeing people coming in and thinking, oh, here we go. You see it as a bit of an intervention, bit of time off. It's easy for you. You haven't got the class, but I get it. I've been in the same spot when people have been coming. I know what you're feeling. So I want to ease that burden on you and show you that it can be easy. Conferences you attend, you're right. For some PE coordinators who've been told you're the PE lead, you know, you used to play netball when you were 16. So you're just going to be PE lead. That's it.
Yeah.
Might be thrown into it. They might see going to a conference as an opportunity just to get out of the school for a day, and they'll sit in the conference making notes of the to-do list, or they might even take a few books to mark. I don't know. And you're right. For those who might make notes, you get caught up in the moment, don't you? It's almost like shiny. I say it on the podcast, it's shiny object syndrome. You see all this amazing stuff. Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I could do that. It's a great idea. But then when you go back to your environment and your familiar surroundings, those cues that trigger habits that you have in your daily life at home and at school just come back in almost immediately. And it's very hard to implement them. I've done that myself. I'm not going to say that I'm perfect. I've been to conferences, writing workshops when I was a class teacher, been buzzing, like, oh, this is ace, this is going to transform my life. Then you're back in school next day and everything just disappears. Actually getting the ball moving and starting the momentum is the hardest bit. Once you're in momentum, then I think it's when you can start to see some success. But you are absolutely right, Ben, nail on the head. It can be really tough getting those teachers to then implement what they've learned. But I think for me, face-to-face is the best way to do that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And again, going back to the point, it comes from the top down, right? If you've got a head teacher that really values PE and physical activity, then that naturally will filter down into the rest of the teachers. And what I try and get across to the teachers in schools that we work with is that you don't have to be the most amazing PE teacher, but as long as the children are outside and they're exercising and they're enjoying it and it's fun. I mean, we put a post up in the Facebook group, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think, asking what people's ideal PE was and what children would leave primary school with. And the vast majority was around kind of like a lifelong learning, that people enjoyed it and then they made healthy choices beyond primary school. So you don't have to be a wonderful PE teacher to make a PE lesson fun. But I think one of the biggest things that I believe in is PE in a lot of schools, this isn't true for every school, is squeezed into the week rather than embedding it into the week and it becoming kind of like a cornerstone of the day. And like I said, it doesn't have to be PE lessons all the time, but it could be that you have brain breaks and learning breaks, that there is physical activity throughout the day. I don't know what you feel about that.
Yeah, no, I think that has to be the way to go. And I think there's no better opportunity than now with going through all this COVID-19 pandemic for going back and having a fresh slate. And I can sort of point back to a couple of podcasts I've done. So with Chris Willen, Water Primary's head teacher from Lancashire, he's flying the flag for PE. His kids have PE days where they come in the tracksuits, they're in the PE kit all day. They'll spend the morning doing PE and exercise, health-based stuff. And then Thorner Primary School with Ian Holmes, again, who has active breaks during the school day. And he enforced that. He spoke to the governor, said, look, this is what we're doing. And this is the reason we're doing it. So I've been in for a day looking around, and it's amazing. At the drop of a hat, if the teacher feels like the children are getting a bit stale, they've been sat down. Because, blocks in the morning can be, and my old school's like, it's like an hour and 40 minutes long.
Yeah.
It's a long time to be sat down for most of it, which they are. And the teacher can just say, right, kids, active break, and they can go into the hall, they can go outside, and just for 10 minutes, just do something. It could be TIG, they could get a ball out. Usually they'll let the children choose 2 or 3 choices of activities. We'll do that finish it, right, kids line up, back in the classroom, and we're re-energized, we're refocused, ready to go. And I witnessed it. I went to there and watched it, and it was incredible. Kids knew where they stood. They knew it was more than just the shiny object syndrome of it was a bit of fun. It was embedded. They knew why they were doing it. They knew the future goals. And I think as a trailblazing head teacher like Ian and Chris, it's so important that they can take this stance for others to follow, because it's very easy to be that sheep and follow what everyone's doing and worry too much about the now and the current results. And this sort of alludes to my rant I had on Saturday night again, is everyone's too worried about the now and bothered about where we're at now, what results you've got now, how it looks to the parents now. And nobody's playing the long game. Nobody's thinking about, well, how about in 5 years when our receptions are in year 5, what will our school look like then? And more people need to think with that mentality about looking at your trajectory. What are you doing now that's going to get you to where you want to be? What is your goal? What is your trajectory looking like? Worry about that, not your current results. And I think head teachers and other educators need to be saying this more to the powers that be, and other parents say, don't worry about now. Look at where we're heading. That's important. And to add to that, I mean, I was luckily enough to be part of the think tank panel last year for the Creating Active Schools framework. That was developed here in Yorkshire. Professor Andy Daly-Smith and many people came together. And I don't know if you've seen it, Ben. It's been on social media quite a bit.
Sure, I have.
If I haven't, I'll send you a picture of it after.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Get up, and it's a framework for how you would go about creating a more active, physically active school day, start to finish, but involving all stakeholders, looking at the bigger picture, the wider community, the school day, the transitions before and after. And that framework is a very useful tool for any school to look at and map out and see obvious gaps in their school day where they're very sedentary, and start to build together what would be a better view of what education should look like, with movement more at the focus and the forefront.
Yeah, those two schools that you mentioned, Ryan, have they? You talk, and I listened to your rant on Saturday, and I was actually going to move on to that in a second. So I'm glad you brought it up. Have those schools started to sort of reap the benefits of what they've put in place yet, or is it quite a recent thing that they've done?
It's hard for me to say. I interviewed both of those head teachers on the podcast last year, probably like February 2019, so just over a year ago now. And at that stage, Thorner were probably a year and so into this journey. And I think Chris, not too dissimilar at Water Primary. His results are excellent at Water Primary, by the way. His results are excellent, but they're a smaller school, which makes logistically it's a little bit easier. Ian at Thorner, again, he's under no illusion that there might be some, if you're judging a school by the results, which unfortunately everyone always does, and the progress and stuff, he's under no illusion that it will take time. He said to me on the podcast, he realizes that what he's doing now is he's planting the seeds now to reap the benefits for tomorrow. And he understands that might be not to be until 3, 4, 5 years time. It might not be until the reception cohort who were at his school when they started the active breaks and started looking at having a more active curriculum, when they get to year 6, and that means every other year group coming in behind has experienced that. That's when you'll really be able to then gauge where you're at, because while you've still got some year groups who experienced how it was before, they'll always remember how it was before and maybe be comparing. It won't be the norm. It still might be quite novel. Whereas those children who've experienced it for their full run through school and it's fully embedded, I think that's when you'll see the benefits and impacts more.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm writing a book at the moment, actually, and the chapter that I've just finished is on kind of like the problems that schools face, and actually touched upon. There were 2 case studies on the government website that did those things that you mentioned: brain breaks, learning breaks, and physical activity was kind of embedded in their week. And I don't remember the statistics, but I'll dig them out and I'll put it on the Facebook group. But there is a lot of data and statistics out there to show that it works. But like you say, it might just take a bit of a time for schools that implement it now, or those schools that you mentioned, just to see those benefits and play the long game, as you say, is crucial. And I suppose from a point of view of, I guess you're talking results in terms of SATs results and attainment levels through the school, but I guess there's other benefits, right, of not just results that you can see, benefits in the children personally as well. Yeah,
well, 100%. Children, for me, and Ian actually said this in the podcast, I can't quote him directly, but the children who are more active, they're happier children. And happier children, from what he's seen, are better learners. It's as simple as that. They're sat down for too long. After no short space of time, the children's brains, our brains do it, start seeping melatonin in there, start getting a bit sleepy. Oh, I could go for a bit. You're not alert, you're not ready, and you need the short, sharp bursts of relieving some energy, getting serotonin, dopamine going. You're ready, you're focused. And as well as that, you think about how you can go about doing it. It's the social benefits. I was speaking to Bryn from Tagtivate, and he said the same thing as well. He was interviewing a child from Thorner, and they do a lot of work where instead of just sitting and you might have your shoulder partners and face partners, they did some work where class teacher Ollie at Thorner said, right, the room is yours to roam now. You can freely roam it, and you can go and talk to others, look at things on the walls. One of the children said, yeah, I usually only get the ideas of my partner, but now I can get the ideas of everybody in this room. The social aspects that it brings to it, of talking with other people they might not chat to, even though they're in the same class for a full year or beyond. They might never engage with that person because they don't have the opportunity other than maybe in a PE lesson. So to embed that throughout the school day and look at the social benefits it brings as well. But you're also then fostering, hopefully, positive habits for life.
Yeah.
Everything with movement, not being sedentary, and transporting that back into the home life. And I'd like to think some of these kids would eventually, if sat down for longer durations at home with their parents, might be like, hang on a minute, what am I doing here? Maybe we should get up, maybe we should go for a walk, or maybe I'm going to do something which isn't just sitting down. And I think that's the hope, isn't it? That what they learn in school can then feed back into maybe some of their home lives and their community too, because that's where they spend a lot of their time, and quite often that's where their first habits are formed.
Yeah, and it's going to be generational as well, right? That the children that we're talking about now that are currently at primary school, if we can embed those good habits now, it might even be a longer game in terms of when they become young adults and they have children themselves, that they've embedded it into their lifestyles and it just becomes the norm.
Yeah, that's what I interviewed Stuart Kay, who was at the Youth Sport Trust at the time. He's not anymore, last year on the podcast. And I went on one of my rant cannons on that episode. I don't even know what he said, but I went off on one and said, look, we're talking about this premium, we're trying into these short-term wins to sort of plug gaps, burst water mains with plasters, and it'll work for maybe a few months or a year or so, and then it all goes kaput again. And what we need to be looking now, like I mentioned before, with the trajectory that we're on, is the game we're playing might be more a generational game. It might be a 20-year game. Because while we're still trying to change the beliefs and habits of teachers towards PE and physical activity, of which some of that does work, hopefully if we get it right at the primary and then secondary level, and the way we take the current reception cohort through school, valuing physical education and health and movement and physical activity, if they experience education that way, by the time some of them are 20, 21 and they become teachers, they don't need convincing. They're going to be the perfect teachers to understand what's got them there and the benefits that can bring. So I don't need to then say to them, look, PE needs to be done like this, and we should be doing more movement and more. They'll know because they've been through that system. But this is like 20 years down the line. And again, we need to acknowledge that. We need to appreciate that I'm going to be much older when hopefully there is a significant change that's noticeable.
Yeah. And the learning that those children do now is going to be more powerful, and they're going to take it with them if everybody's pulling together. I guess in sport, when you've got a team, if everybody's driving towards the same goal, if you've got a head teacher, if you've got teachers, if you've also got, you mentioned community, if you've got parents that are coming in and doing, I don't know, morning parent and child workouts. And I went to a school in Banbury that invited grandparents in during lunchtimes, and they called it like the pensioner program, and they're playing like Foursquare with the kids. Brilliant. So I guess the more people that buy into that philosophy, the more those children are likely to think, well, this is just something that I've loved in primary school, and I'm going to continue on into secondary and beyond. Yeah,
and I think the best examples of schools where that's successful are ones where everyone does buy in. Chris Willen said, look, being a PE coordinator or PE lead, it's not a single person's job. To do it the way it needs to be done and everything done the right way, it's impossible to do it by yourself, quite frankly. And he said everyone's chipping in, whether it's from lunchtime staff, TAs, parents. It's a whole community impact doing all these bits and pieces that contributes to that ethos and that belief system and value of what physical activity, sport and physical education brings to a school.
I know when we were messaging, Ryan, I sent you a few options as to what we were going to talk about this evening, and one of them was behaviour management. I know I won't keep you too much longer. We kind of keep it to half an hour, but just to briefly touch upon it. And I think it fits into what we're talking about now in terms of having that whole school ethos. Some schools that experience tough behavior will almost take the reverse action, and they'll do less PE because they're worried about delivering PE when you've got children that potentially are runners and might try and escape the lesson. When in fact, in my view, it's a perfect way of trying to manage behavior by increasing physical activity levels and having those learning breaks as well.
Some of I have to agree with you. Some of the most challenging children I've ever taught are the least challenging when they're in PE.
Absolutely.
Because they want to be in, they want to be there. And I don't want to tarnish everyone with the same brush, but the most challenging ones I'm thinking of were more natural, like sporty. They liked their football. They liked being active and impressing. That was their theatre to impress. Their behaviour may have stemmed from a number of things, but the ones that spring to my mind found the academic stuff more challenging, but were actually very, very capable when it came to physical education. So to deprive them of that would have been scandalous. And actually their behaviour just from being in PE was better. It wasn't by no means perfect. They have to toe the line, and you can use strategies to do that. And there was one boy springs into my mind who he just used to help me all the time. He was my helper. I'd get him to do a lot of the demos, and I try and get other kids to help me as well. But they knew that from what he could be like, that having that attention, he could be my demonstrator, my partner. I'd have him with me right near the front. But it mean for him, he would stay in pretty much every single PE lesson and be fantastic. Whereas this is a child who in other areas of curriculum would be taken out. He wouldn't survive the lesson because behaviour was that bad. PE, spot on if you engaged him in the right way. And I think, like I said, it's really unfair. It's really harsh to take away the activity time, to take away play times, to take away PE time for these children who, quite frankly, that is what they need. That's what they crave. And that could be the way back in to transforming their behaviour for the rest of school.
Yeah. And similarly, I've got a story of a boy that I used to teach, and he was from a traveller background. And he was similar to what you're saying, really struggled in the classroom, but get him outside. He's probably one of the most talented boys I've ever taught. And he just loved being outside, and he was a raw footballer. That was his thing. He just loved football. But you give him any piece of equipment, he became really good at cricket. He became really good at basketball. He was just a naturally talented boy. But equally, then there were times when the school tried to reduce his PE as almost like a punishment. It was like, no, what are you doing? Like this is this boy's outlet. It's his favorite lesson of the week. Why would you take it away from him? And it just, without going into too much depth on him specifically, I think it just reinforces that rather than squeezing PE into the week, if that boy and the boy you're talking about and other boys and girls that struggle in the classroom, if they're doing maths lessons or creative writing outside, it just gives them a whole new environment. It gets them active, and it's almost disguised learning, I guess, that there are strategies that class teachers can use to get those children on board and build that rapport with them.
Yeah, and sometimes what they crave is they just crave a lot of the behaviour will stem from attention, but they just want some attention, and they might not have had that role model or adult figure in their life who shows that they're caring, and taking that time, even if they've made a poor choice, but just being firm but fair. It might just be just 2 minutes out there. Just think about that, and then going and having a chat, not bellowing at them, not raising your voice and giving them a hairdryer treatment. Just being honest and open with them, building a relationship. I really care about you. I really want you in my lesson. You're a superstar, and I need you to help me out, quite frankly. And having, sometimes you can see in their minds, their brains clicking when they acknowledge them. They're like, somebody's actually talking to me as though I'm like a human. They're talking to me really nicely, and maybe they're not used to that. They're used to being berated and used to being immediately clamped down on, like this is. And actually, sometimes taking the opposite approach is what they just crave and they need, and that's been lovely. There's loads of little tips and strategies I've picked up from the podcast in terms of behaviour management. There's tons, and each to their own. And in certain schools, one of my favourite, I might as well just share it now while I'm here. One of my favourite was from Kyle Bragg, a teacher in the States, and he must have had a challenging behaviour from, wasn't necessarily a particularly sporty child either, but just low level stuff, quite bouncy, not always following what needs to be done and instructions. And Kyle Bragg's tip, which I loved because it was very discreet, is he would have elastic bands or hair ties on one of his arms. And he would say to the child before the lesson, "Oh, see, I've got these 4 hair ties here. If you're first at doing this, or if I catch you and think you're really impressing me with some of your choices in this lesson, or you're engaging with this, or working well, or communicating with the partner well, I'm going to move one band over to my other arm and put it on my other arm. And then if I catch you again, nice. I'm going to move a band. And your aim is to try and have all 4 bands moved over to this arm by the end of the lesson. And then if that happens, I'm going to speak to your class teacher, head teacher. You're going to get head teacher's award. Really impressed. And it's not a public show where all the other kids know. It's just between me and that child. That's our little game in the lesson. And then it's funny when you see that smirk or smile on their face when you've moved one over after the first 5 minutes because they've come out, got stuck into the warm-up. And you can see that knowing look because they've come and they've sat down or they're looking straight away ready. And you've moved that band over. And that's a really lovely way to sort of sometimes manage the low-level stuff. If you've got that one student who you're struggling with, it's definitely worth a try.
Yeah. It's similar to when I did my PGC, one of my mentors. So I'm a secondary school PE teacher. I don't know if we even said that at the start. So when I did my PGC, my mentor, who sort of stands out in my mind, his behaviour management, I mean, I couldn't teach like it because he was just relentless in terms of the amount of energy he had. But his thing was always to spot children doing good. And even if they're the furthest child away, which is kind of what you mentioned there, to identify. And then the other children's like, oh, how has he seen that going on over there? I'll make sure that I'm, on task because I might get spotted doing something good as well. And one of the biggest things that we say to our coaches is that positive praise and feedback, but equally patience and that tactical ignorance of that lower level stuff. Even if a child walks out of your lesson, as long as they're still in the lesson and they're visible, that's fine. Get the others into the activity, go and speak to them. And I know it's counterintuitive kind of because you want that child to be engaged straight away.
So true.
That's
funny you say that. It's one of the things that I find the most difficult to do. And I have to really try hard to not immediately address the negative behaviour. So I've got a full class who, for whatever reason, might be sat down looking at me. I try not to get them still for too long. But if they were, for example, and there's one child who's pushing the luck and messing with something or making a noise, whatever it may be, obviously highlight the ones who are doing right. Oh, Sally over there, I'm really impressed. Your body language is amazing. And I like your eye contact. I know you're listening really smart, whatever it would be. And then inside, I'm dying to talk to whoever it is who's not. But just try and ignore it because, again, they're seeking that attention. And then when you've set the class off doing what you need to do, then go and have a quiet word. And it could just be really privately. It doesn't have to be so everyone knows. Everyone else is busy doing their task, but then you go have that quiet word. Oh, so-and-so, I noticed that when I was chatting that you were doing X, Y, or Z. I really appreciate it if the next time I stop, I'm going to look in your direction. Hopefully you'll be the first person and just quietly have a chat. And again, in a nice way, what do you expect? And just so it's not made public. And that is a really good strategy and tip as well, I have to say.
Yeah. I don't know if you've read the book by Paul Dix, When Adults Change, Everything Changes.
I haven't read it yet. No, everyone on the planet seems to have, but I haven't.
Yeah, it's a good one. And he talks about that as well, that tactical ignorance and almost then that you are dealing with it and you always have to deal with it, but do it at kind of the child's inconvenience because they want to then join in with the rest of the class, but you're then talking to them. And it's, hugely powerful. Ryan, I won't take up any more of your time because I know we've been on for sort of over half an hour now, but it's been amazing. Where can people find more? And obviously you've got the PE Umbrella podcast, which I assume is on the usual platforms.
Oh, yes. PE Umbrella podcast is, from what I understand, on most of the usual podcast platforms. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, pretty much anywhere you find a podcast, I think. And then peumbrella.com, www.peumbrella.com. There's all the podcasts on there, tons of free resources and bits and pieces too. And then social media, if you just search on Facebook for the PE Umbrella, there's a page, a group. I'm probably most active on Twitter at the PE Umbrella, LinkedIn, Instagram. It's all there.
Amazing. Well, thank you. So we could probably go on for another half an hour, but I won't take up any more of your time. Maybe we'll try and book you in the future.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to chat along. The podcasts are sometimes up to an hour. So this seems like a short stint for me. So
there we go. Well, again, thank you so much, Ryan. It's been hugely beneficial, certainly to me, and I'm sure the viewers as well. So thank you again, and I'm sure we'll catch up soon.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, Ben.
Thanks, Ryan. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.